surprising how many government buildings that I go into that have the security set up where, I mean, you gotta go through security, then you can't even bring in any sort of liquid as part of it too.
Oh, right. I got this from the employee break room. I have access.
Thank you for supporting
Yeah.
the community.
Whatever it goes to, yeah. And Chief Pooler, the stash is coming in fabulous. For approval of the minutes as identified in the agenda.
Move approval of the minutes.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. And then item 2 is an appearance before the committee, Brian Grunwald with Clifton Larson Allen and Ms. Stino. Yes. Yeah, if you could tell us how we're doing based on the comprehensive annual financial report. And of course, we're just looking for some quick highlights.
But I didn't bring it. Thank you.
Don't have to go over everything. Issues that we should be concerned about in particular that you'd like to draw our attention to. Yeah, go ahead, please.
So first off, thanks for having me here this evening. And I know you mentioned it, I just want to recap on it a little bit. Effective January 1, Schenck did merge in with Clifton Larson Allen, so therefore the references to Clifton Larson Allen and CLA throughout the documents. So just want to highlight that. And I also want to thank Peggy, certainly Peggy and your team. They put in a tremendous amount of effort throughout the audit process, so just want to acknowledge them and thank them for that, because we obviously need their help. I guess I was going to just walk through the management communication letter. I'll just start with a few highlights on that, and then I've also got a few comments that I'd like to make with regards to the comprehensive financial report. If there's anything in particular that you guys would like me to talk about, just please feel free to ask or point me in that direction. The first 5 pages of the management communication letter is a standard letter. It's pretty consistent with what you've seen in the past. based on your comments, I'm just gonna focus and scale down my discussion here a little bit.
Thank you.
But there are a few things that I do wanna highlight. On page 2, in the top of page 2 does reference significant audit findings, and it talks about consideration of internal control. As part of the audit process, we look at how things are done. We refer to that as your internal control environment. I just wanted to stress the importance of that internal control environment. Certainly with a city of this size and the different activities and things that you've going on, very important to make sure that you have processes in place and that you consistently follow those. So I want to emphasize that. Now, from a reporting perspective, we consider your internal control structure. We don't give an opinion on that. If there were any issues or findings, they would be referenced in this section of the letter. So there are none. So that's certainly a positive. So just want to emphasize that. The middle section, you'll see about halfway down, it references federal and state awards. There it moves into the compliance portion of the discussion. Meaning as part of the audit process, we look at various federal and state programs, we complete testing of those for compliance. Again, I'm not aware of any compliance issues. If there were, they'd be discussed and referenced in this section. So in terms of how you're doing things, internal control and the results of our compliance testing, certainly no news is good news, right? But again, I want to stay that way. The reminder is keep focusing on your processes and procedures and make sure that they're consistent and followed. The rest of this letter is pretty standardized. It talks about things like accounting practices, accounting estimates. I would say nothing that I would consider to be a red flag from my perspective, certainly nothing that I would consider unusual. So unless anyone has any other questions or comments, maybe we'll just keep moving along. Okay, all right. Then we always like to use this letter just to provide and highlight some financial information. Certainly when you step back and think of the financial condition of the city, the most common benchmark or metric is to look at your fund balance. So that's what we're looking at on page 6 and through 8. I'm just going to make a few brief comments. On page 6, this just gives you a snapshot of your general fund. If you jump down to the last line with the subtotals, you'll see the total for your general fund balance. You can see at the end of 18, you're at $45,563,000 versus $45,210,000 for the previous year. So your fund balance did increase $353,000 during the year. Without getting into too much details, I guess I would recommend that you read the management discussion and analysis section of this document. It just gives you a nice narrative overview and touches on a little bit of the budgetary highlights and other financial highlights that might put that into some perspective as well. When I step back and look at those categories, certainly the most common category that I like to look at is that unassigned category. That's the amount that's in theory available for working capital and contingency reserves. When you look at that category, you can see we're at about 11.5 million back in 2017, and that has increased up to 12.3 million, or just under 12.3 million for 2018. So certainly nice to see your general fund balance increasing, nice to see that unassigned balance coming up. And the other item that I guess really sticks out in your statements here is about halfway down that table, there's a line for unfunded pension liability. Just a reminder, as we're going to talk about the pension liability coming up, but you do have 9.5 million of your general fund balance that has been earmarked or designated for that. You can see the other categories there. Obviously you have to go through your process of identifying what you want to set funds aside for. Real quickly on page 7, I'll be able to just jump to the subtotal. The section at the top of page 7 focuses on your special revenue funds. If you just jump to the subtotal, the total for the special revenue funds, you were at about 6.9 million back at the end of 17. Now you're at about 6.4 million at the end of 2018. So those special revenue funds did decrease a little bit. When you look at the different balances there, I think it's really more just a matter of normal operations, nothing real unusual or significant in terms of the fluctuation there. The next section is the capital projects fund. If you look at the total there, your total capital projects fund, at the end of 2017, you'll see the 4.7 million in brackets. So you were in a deficit for those funds at the end of 2017. That did improve, but you still have a deficit of 1.4 million at the end of 2018. Now, when you look at the individual funds that make that up, that obviously is influenced by your TIF districts. And I will say that it is normal when you think of the purpose and the life of a TIF district, it's pretty normal to start out, spend money, get in a deficit, and then over the life of that TID, you're trying to recover the investment that you made. So it's all part of the normal process. You know, something that Peggy and I talk about as part of the audit process is what's the status of the TIDs, how are they doing, what's their project plan, how are they doing in comparison to that project plan. So I'm not trying to say that that's unusual. I would say just make sure that you're monitoring what's going on in those TIDs versus the project plans. Obviously, you want to do what you can to stimulate or encourage development.
Why was there the $2 million swing in the public works improvements, that first item there?
The first one there? You were in a deficit, is there?
So what we did was we were trying to reallocate all of the funds that the council had assigned for different things. And part of that was things that we assigned in the 2018 year for projects that are getting done in 2019 as part of our CIP. Remember, we weren't gonna put those in the fund balance, we were gonna move those right to the capital
Oh,
projects
okay.
fund and spend some of those out of there. So that was part of that plan.
Keep going, you're on a
Okay,
roll.
sounds good. Okay, page 8. This is just focusing on your general fund. I just like to see trends, and I'm a visual person, so that the table at the top just gives you a snapshot of what was your general fund balance. Certainly shows you the different categories, and it just shows you your trend for the last 5 years. To put it in perspective, at the end of 2014, you had about 41.4 million of fund balance. That did increase. You can see that as you move across that table. At the end of 2017, you had about 45.2, and at the end of 18, you're at about 45.6. So it just gives you some visual perspective of your history on your fund balance. When you look across the different components of that, you know, a trend that I see is the slight decrease in your non-spendable fund balance. Non-spendable is just an accounting term for how we have to set aside certain resources, so it's nice to see that coming down. The committed and assigned, those are areas where you get to have some influence in terms of how you earmark or what you want to use funds for. So those I consider to be your planning opportunities. And then that unassigned is really what's left, the amount that's available for working capital and contingency reserves. Again, when you look at the trend, you can see how that has grown. 6.3 million back in 2014, 8 million in 2016, and now you're at 12 million at the end of 2018. So that gives you a snapshot of that. The table at the bottom of that page, now from a benchmarking perspective, one of the common measurements is how much fund balance do we have in comparison to the size of our budget. That's the purpose of this graph. The bottom line there is focusing on your unassigned fund balance. You can see the growth. Back in 2014, you were at 11.7%. That's grown. At the end of 2017, you're at 21%. Now you're at about 22%. So certainly positive growth. Nice to see the growth. In terms of the overall balance, 22% is a strong number, so that's good.
So we should just talk a little bit. We did have some hand in the unassigned and the assigned changing, because as we went through it, Brian and I went through it, there were some assignments that were being made in the past that weren't perhaps with accounting standards, so we just went through this year and updated those, so some of that changes from that.
Clean up those categories there. Now, the other item that we look at is your assigned, because again, you have some control over that, so that's the top line in this graph. And I'll say this, you're relatively flat, you were at 39%, now you're at 37.6. Certainly a strong balance. When I step back and think of the combined picture of your assigned and unassigned, you have strong fund balance reserves, again, gives you great planning opportunities, allows you to do things like set aside $9.5 million for your unfunded pension liability. So my recommendation there is keep monitoring the budget, keep planning from a budgetary perspective, and when you do that, you can really kind of control what you want your fund balance to look like. So good news there from a fund balance perspective. I just want to talk briefly on water. That's on page 9. So this gives you a snapshot of your operating results for the water utility. If you walk down this table, it's really designed to show you your operating revenues, operating expenses. From a financial perspective, we really like to look at your operating income. You really want to make sure that your rates are designed to cover your costs and your operating expenses. That's why I like to look at this table. And if you keep going down the chart or the table, you can see non-operating revenues, expenses, capital contributions, transfers out. And then the last line there, the change in net position. From an operating perspective, really what happened is in the expense category, we did have some changes or some accounting adjustments, I guess I would say, due to governmental accounting standards 68 and 75. I don't want to get into details too much on that. We work with Peggy from a GASB 75 perspective. There's an actuary that calculates that. So that kind of takes the subjectivity out of that. We're just recording the information that we're provided with. So those expenses are up because of how those allocations occurred. And as a result of that, your operating income is down a little bit. And then that transfer out, just because that utility is regulated, you do have a transfer that gets made back to your general fund. So when you look at that, I guess the message is there is that you're changing that position. It is negative, 137,000. I mean, I do know that you're going through the water rate application process. So certainly the PSC is heavily involved with regulating and monitoring rates as a part of that process. So that's why they want to make sure you're doing okay from a financial perspective. Given your comments, I'm going to jump over and skip a couple of these other tables and charts, but if anyone, again, if anybody would like me to talk about those, I'd be more than happy to. I just think there's a couple other probably bigger topics that I'd like to touch on in the
Yeah, please go on to the bigger stuff, please.
Okay, so that's a snapshot of that letter. In terms of the comprehensive annual financial report, just gonna pull mine apart, a couple highlights. Again, you go through a review and an audit opinion that is received from Clifton Larson Allen. I mean, you also apply for and submit your report to the Government Finance Officers Association. As part of that process, you are applying for and they're reviewing your comprehensive annual financial report, and they continue to issue your certificate of achievement for excellence in financial reporting. So I just wanted to highlight that. It's a nice award. Congratulations on that. Obviously, there's a little more work and effort that goes into that process, so just want to recognize.
So
that.
that's, I don't wanna say it's pass fail, but that's like the highest, that's the standard says that we're completely in compliance,
Yeah, I mean, again,
essentially.
exactly. I mean, from a audit perspective, our opinion carries that weight. I mean, from you have a clean opinion on your statements.
Yep.
This is an additional award that you applied for and received.
So it's more a completeness. We have a
Yep.
document that has a lot of complete information about the statistics and demographics of our community and different things like that. So the CAFR award is basically looking at the kind of report you file. They look at the content. and
Right,
the
that's,
quality of
so that's an award on the report.
Correct.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so then the other comments that I guess I just wanted to touch on briefly. So I did, again, when you step back and you think of the financial information and what are some of the keys, fund balance is number one. The other items that I wanted to talk about were just your long-term general obligation debt. So if you can jump ahead to page 66. The table on the bottom of page 66 just gives you a snapshot of your long-term obligations and your long-term debt. So it's divided into two portions. Governmental activities is really the cities and the TIDs. The business type activities is your utilities. I'm just gonna start out with the top portion, the governmental activities, and I'm gonna walk across that line that's labeled total general obligation debt. So this just shows you what happened during the year. At the beginning of the year, you had 42.7 million outstanding. You issued 7.7 million of new debt. You retired or paid principal of 6.5 million, and that left you with 43.9 million of debt outstanding at the end of the year. So started at 42.7, ended at 43.9. If you go over one more column, that due within 1 year, that's the amount of principal that you are scheduled to repay based on the agreements that you had in place and the amortization schedules you had in place as of 12/31 of 18. So scheduled to repay 6 million of principal in 2019. Okay, so that's just a snapshot. If you go down to the business type activities section, again, same information, 28.5 million of outstanding general obligation debt at the beginning of the year. You issued 4 million, retired 3.2 million of principal, and ended the year at 29.4. So ended at 29.4, started at 28.5. And again, due within 1 year, you're scheduled to repay 3.4 million in 2019. So with that chart, I just like to use that as, hey, what's the snapshot? What happened during the year? There's a table on the bottom of page 67. And the first column is labeled year ended December 31st, and then it lists the various years. I'm just gonna jump all the way over to the right, where it lists the totals for your total principal and interest. I always like to look at how quickly are you repaying. Total principal, you can see that over the course of the next few years, You're scheduled to repay 9.4 million in 2019. If you look at the next 5 years, 2019 through 2023, you're scheduled to repay 42.4 million. So I think that's always noteworthy. How much debt do we have? How much are you paying off? So in 5 years, you are scheduled to repay 42 million out of the 73 million that's outstanding now. Again, that's as of 12/31, this point in time. Obviously, things change when you do things like issue new debt, refinance, and whatnot. So that's just a snapshot as of 12/31. And then my last comment on debt, if you jump ahead to page 68, the table at the top of page 68, there is a statutory limit on how much debt you can have. So when you walk through this table in the calculation, the third line down is labeled general obligation debt limitation per section 6703 of the statutes. That's your debt limit, 191 million, versus the amount that you actually have outstanding, the 73 million. From a benchmarking perspective, I always like to look at, well, how much of your debt capacity or your debt limit have you actually, issued and have outstanding? You have 38, you're at about 38% of the statutory limit, again, as of 12/31/18. Now, my recommendation on that, just as you go through your budget process, obviously important to budget your revenues, budget your expenses, and that helps you control what your fund balance is gonna look like. It's also important to step back from a long-term perspective and think about how are we financing things, what's gonna happen with our debt. When you step back and look at this statutory debt formula, again, I like to benchmark on that. I would say, and my recommendation would be, is pick a point in terms of what you want your maximum to be, and just try to make sure you stay within that. So for example, there's some communities I work with, they say 50%, there's some that say 60%. Obviously, you've gotta find the limit that works for you. My point with that is I would never encourage you to get up to 100%. Obviously that's a lot of debt, and you gotta repay it too. So I would say pick your point, you do that as a part of your looking at your long-term capital plan, consider the impact on your budget, meaning you've gotta repay the principal and interest, there's a budget component to that, and just see where you wanna be in terms of your overall debt picture. So that's a lot about debt. I don't know if anyone has any questions on that.
On that point picking, what are other cities similar to, well, I mean, we talk about benchmarking.
Yep.
And to me, that's comparing to what our neighbors are doing,
Yep.
What do we typically see?
And I'll say, everybody's a little unique in
Different,
that,
get that.
because it always comes down to, when I think of debt, I also think of, okay, well, where are you at from a capital needs perspective? So if you're a place that has things like a new city hall, newer infrastructure, my general expectation is that I'm probably gonna see more debt, right? If you have more rundown roads, older facilities, you probably have lower debt. So you've gotta kinda correlate that to where you are in that life cycle of your buildings, right? So that I'd say is number one. That's why I said tie it back to your capital plan. When I think of what other communities are doing, I would say that my off-the-cuff answer to that would be I think the most common answer is like 60%. I have a few of them that are working with 60%. So again, I think, but you gotta find what works for you, and as you do that, as you think of what are the needs that are out there, I would say look at the debt structure and how are you going to repay that. Again, with the levy limit formulas you have now, certainly you can do things. You can add the debt to the levy and tax for it. You just gotta make sure you're willing to do that, so.
And we just have to keep in mind, Moody's cares about that.
Yeah.
So if we borrow
Yes.
too much too fast,
Yeah.
don't have a plan, those kind of things, if you get up near 70%, 70 plus, they start to look at that, and they also downgrade because of amount of leverage, yeah, so just all things we need to pay
And
attention to.
I will say, depending on who you're looking at, the rules and how they operate is a little bit different. So you're looking at a county, or you're looking at a city, or you're looking at a town or a village. Just, make sure that, or understand there are some differences there. For example, towns and villages tend to get a little bit higher on that percentage. Counties tend to be lower. If I would see a county with 60%, I would be concerned. So just make sure you're benchmarking versus cities, I guess would be my recommendation.
So it'd be fair to say we're below average.
Below average for the good.
Yes,
Well,
right, yeah, I mean,
We're positively below average.
yeah.
So I would say when I was referring to that, 60% was their common limit.
Yeah.
Where they are in comparison to that limit probably varies. Now, I know I do have a couple of them that do have 60% as their limit, and they're fairly close to that. One of them just built a new city hall. So again, there's things that influence that. I would have to do a little more benchmarking if I'd wanna say what's the
Okay,
average in terms of.
so I guess
outstanding.
maybe, so we don't, we don't have a limit. This is 38, this is just where we're at.
Right.
And you're suggesting that we kind of decide on a limit.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is not are what other communities' limits, but what are other communities at?
And that's where I think I would, before I would answer that, I would probably want to do a little bit more of a benchmark to say, okay, what do I really see that's out there?
Yeah.
Again, what I was referring to is, I know there's a lot of other communities that say, yeah, we want our limit to be
Yeah.
50 cent, or we want our limit to be 60%. Again, I know of some that are closer to those limits, and that's how they're monitoring and staying within those limits. I don't know, I guess I would,
We compare pretty well. It's something we
Yeah.
monitor on a regular basis. The one thing that we do here that a lot of communities don't is we issue all of our utility debt as geo debt, get a little bit better rate, but it's the full faith of the city behind it, not just the utility rate. So that's something we might want to be changing in the future.
So that's added into our 38%.
Correct.
right,
It's almost half of it.
Oh.
yeah,
So we just need to be
So
careful on
utility
that
debt could
as
be
we
out
go.
separate.
Correct.
right. Most would issue revenue bonds for utility debt, which takes it out of this formula
Right, but it
completely.
gets
Yeah,
a less attractive rate.
How much utility debt do we have?
That was that business activity one that he was to 29 million.
29, yeah.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
pretty
that's a
good.
fair chunk.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's good as long as you can do it, but when we start talking about some of these bigger things that we're gonna potentially borrow for in the future, that's something where we're likely not gonna be able to do those and do utility debt all under. Because you can see under both the general obligation as well as the utility debt, we increased last year.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, they
that,
both went up, yeah.
you just have to be mindful of how fast that's going, and it's important about the rating agencies and all of that, but the most important thing is ability to repay, right? The taxpayers' desire to repay, so.
And Mr. Chair,
Sure, go ahead.
we're about 41 million away from the 0.6, the 60%.
Yeah, I'm not saying we need to know.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can build a lot of things with that.
No, I don't know.
I know, just the opposite.
I'm gonna leave that for future councils.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so again, then in terms of, financial condition, the other thing I just wanted to walk through real quickly is on page 87. And this is related to your other post-employment benefits. And again, there's various pages throughout the report that give you different pieces of information. The reason I picked page 87 is because the bottom of this table, there's a line labeled total OPEB liability ending. That's the outstanding liability balance at the end of the year. If you work across that page, you can see the history of what that liability balance has been. 140 million, 146 million, and now 118 million. So just giving you some history and some perspective on where that liability has been. And as a reminder, I mean, that is calculated by the actuary. I think it was it last year that
This
Pete
year.
Anderson was here?
Oh.
So I know you've had some discussions on that
Right,
in the
right.
past too.
And we just had a new report done this year, which you were all presented from Jack from Milliman back in June. So you know why those numbers have gone down.
So just gives you some perspective on your history with that as well. So again, as you talk about a bond rating agency, what do they look at? They look at the things we talked about: fund balance, debt, other post-employment benefits. Where are you from an unfunded liability perspective?
Good to see it going down.
Right.
I'd say considerably.
Yeah, a big chunk there.
Probably the biggest decrease we're ever going to see.
Yeah.
Stop that.
Okay, so those are the comments that I wanted to make. Anyone else have any questions, thoughts?
No, thank you very much. Thanks for all your work on this. Yeah, appreciate it.
Mr. Chair, I just have one.
Yep.
I saw somewhere in here when I was reading it, the AA2 rating. Is that what we were at for last year? We don't know what our rating is going into next year yet. Okay.
We won't go until we go to borrow, which will be late. Usually what I'm doing is borrowing late in the year because our cash flow is in a good position. There's no sense in borrowing in February, March, and April and carrying that interest for the whole year. So we borrow pretty close to year end. So that'll probably be like November, beginning of December when we know that new rating. Our hope is maintenance. We want to keep that same rating. We'd have to have something. When you saw the last year's report, you saw the list of what could make the rating go up and what could make it go down. We really don't have any
Don't
of
have a
those
lot of
big things
control
happening,
over
so
that
we
kind of
just want
stuff.
it to stay the same. That would be our goal, to maintain.
Okay, thank you.
All right, yeah, thank you both. And I don't think our committee needs to take any action on this unless somebody tells me differently. Place it on file?
Move
Okay.
to place on file.
Second.
Motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you.
Ayes
Thanks.
have it.
Thanks.
All right, and then moving on to item 3, an ordinance to establish the salary of the mayor of the city of West Allis for a 4-year term commencing on the 3rd Tuesday of April 2020. Go ahead, committee.
Well, did we want to keep these going until budget? Or what was the plan? I mean, I think what's shown there is fine, but I thought in general we were just going to keep those until budget time.
Ms. Grill.
The direction was to bring them back in September, so that's.
Okay.
what I'm
Oh,
doing.
so it's
We're-
like-
We're not probably, like you said, in a very good place to know what we would be doing for employees if that's what we're trying to look at for next year. So I don't know if there there was also a request to get comps for the municipal judge, so I have that. I have the comps for the mayor and other people. I can share that with the committee and the council. And then you could take action at a later date. There was also something said that we should assume 2% for the mayor. That's probably less significant than if there was going to be a change to the council members' salaries. So I'm not sure where that's going, but that would be something that could have an effect on, we would need to know that when we're budgeting, so. And the budget will be presented to the council on, it'll come out on the
15th or
October 15th meeting.
Sure, so what's the opinion of the committee? What do you want to do?
You said you got the information, we're gonna email us that
Yeah, I
information?
can send that.
Yeah, send us that information, let's look at it.
And it's gonna have benefits and all that wrapped into it. It's a
For
pretty-
the,
It's your
for-
usual comprehensive chart.
for the mayor and for the council members, it has the benefits included. It doesn't, I do not have that for the
Judge.
Okay, so we'll continue to hold items 3, 4, and 5 without any objection. All right. And then moving on to the item 6, the West Allis firefighters communication regarding union negotiations. We'll discuss that in closed session, and I'll read the closed session notice. For the above agenda item, the committee may convene in closed session pursuant to the provisions of Wisconsin Statute Section 1985.851E to deliberate or negotiate the investment of public funds or conduct other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session. The committee may convene in open session after the completion of the closed session and consider the balance of the agenda.
Move to go into closed session.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Alderman Rote.
Aye.
Alderman May.
Aye.
Alderman Chaplesky.
Aye.
Alderman Weigel.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. All right, we're in closed session.